Hi, I'm Stefan from Mick and in my last two videos I showed you how I created the bass and the guitars for my cover of Mick Gordon, The Only Thing They Fear Is You, without playing a single note on either a guitar or a bass. And in this video I want to complete the series on my Mick Gordon cover by showing you how I mix the drums. I recorded the drums here in this little room. It is 3.5 meters by 4.5 meters, so approximately 12 feet by 15 feet, so kind of a small room. But let me show you how I mix the drums to make them sound huge. Let's jump into the DAW. Okay, so here we have the Reaper file of the session. First of all, let's listen to the whole cover. Here you can also see the video of me recording the drums. Let's solo the drums. Okay, and now before we take a look at every single instrument of the drums, I want to take a look at my drum bus processing. Because when mixing, I generally adapt a top-down mixing approach. So I first insert some basic tone shaping plugins on the buses and then make less processing on individual tracks. So here, if I open the effects on the drum bus, we have a gain plugin. This is just for some gain staging, so we can ignore that for now. Then I have a SSL style bass compressor from Brainworks. This is the BX Downhouse bass compressor. Ratio 2:1, attack 30 milliseconds, release 100 milliseconds, no makeup gain, and a sidechain filter of 93 Hz. Mix is at 100%. After this bass compressor, there is an SSL channel, again from Brainworks, the BX Console SSL 4000E, where I'm adding a little bit of top end, 0.8 dB at 8 kHz, shelf is enabled, and a little bit 0.9 dB at 63 Hz. Also some 200, 1.4 at 200 with a fairly narrow Q. The compressor and the gate section are not active. I also enabled the high pass filter at 18 Hz, so filtering out the very lows. Let's listen to what difference these two plugins make. You can see that the compressor is doing 1 to 2 dB of gain reduction, and overall these two plugins add some excitement to the drums. And now let's take a look at every single track of the drums. First of all, let me mute these three tracks. These are parallel auxes that I will get into once I've created the basic sound for the drums. This is a reverb, a parallel compression, and a parallel distortion. So let's take a look at the kick drum. Let's solo the kick, mute the samples and bypass the processing, and listen to how the raw kick sounds. This was a Mapex Saturn V 22 by 18 inch kick drum with a Shure Beta 91A boundary mic inside the kick drum, going into a Audient preamp and then into a RME converter. I added some EQ, cutting some mids and also a nasty high frequency, and cleaned up some of the bass region. It makes the kick drum sound more focused and less boxy. Then I added lots of samples. I think when you are recording drums in such a small room, using samples to enhance your drum recordings is the fastest way to get great sounding end results. So I used also a lot of samples on this recording. First we have one of the CLA preset from the CLA extension for Trigger 2. This is the CLA Rock Kit 7. Let's listen to just this sample. A great sounding sample with lots of attack. And then I used another instance of Trigger 2 on a separate track where I used some of my own samples. These three have more like a E-drums characteristic to them, and this one here is a GGD drum sample from Modern and Massive. Altogether, the kick drum sounds like this. You can hear how much the final kick drum sound relies on samples. Then I have also a lot of processing on the kick bass. First of all, a cue with a low cut and another cut at 150 Hz. Just to clean up the kick a little bit. Next up, we have again the SSL console by Brainworks, adding a lot of highs here at 8K and also at 3K, and also a lot of lows, 12 dB at 60 Hz. Notice also that the in-gain is down by 6 dB to compensate for the volume added by these drastic EQ moves. The compressor is also active. I turned the THD knob, which adds saturation to the signal, all the way down because I don't want any additional saturation on my kick drum. Now the kick sounds much bigger, but then afterwards I had to clean up some frequencies here around 185 Hz. Now the kick drum is less boomy. Next up we have this compressor MJUC from Klanghelm. This is a free compressor, so if you want to improve your kick drum sound, then I recommend this compressor. Just download it for free, apply these settings, and you will have a better kick drum sound instantly. The attack is on the slower side, the recovery is medium fast, the wet is at 80%. It adds volume but also punch to the kick drum. Then again, an instance of FabFilter Pro Q3 to clean up the low end but also to add more of the very lows. Next up we have a gate, the FabFilter Pro G gate. This is sidechained by a kickstem that I have created using the original kick drum recording and applying the gate from the Steven Slade Trigger 2 plugin onto it. So I would just duplicate the kick track, insert Trigger 2, mix to 0, enable the gate, attack as fast as possible, hold as fast as possible, and release also quite short, so that I have just the attack of the kick drum, and I want this signal to trigger the gate on my proper kick track. Although I'm not using it every single time, I really like this workaround on my drum gates. I think it is more precise, and also I have more flexibility. when there is some bad triggering of the drum gate. I will show you what I mean. Let's get rid of this track and use the original one. I will enable the master stand and solo it. If the gate doesn't work properly, I can adjust this sidechain track instead of the real kick drum track. Let's disable the parent send and go ahead with the kick drum processing, and let's listen to what this gate does. Next up we have the Lindell 50 channel. This is a API channel strip from Lindell plugins. I'm adding some highs and some lows, cutting some mids. Also the input gain is a bit down, the gate section and the compressor section is not active. Again, more attack, less boxiness to make the sound more in your face. And lastly, we have an SPL transit designer to get even more attack out of the kick drum. So we started from here and got this. Pretty drastic improvement, a lot of samples, but that's needed with this room. Let's jump to the snare. Also here, disable the plugins and the samples. Listen to the raw recording. We have a snare top mic, an Audix i5, and the snare bottom mic should be a biodynamic TG57, both again running into a Audient and RME converters. On these two mics I first added an EQ, cutting some mids and some highs. And also here cutting this weird resonance at 250. Then we have a gate, again the FabFilter Pro G, but this time it's using the internal sidechain, and also the range is not all the way up, but just at 12 dB. So when the signal doesn't reach the threshold, it's turned down only by 12 dB and the gate doesn't close completely. Also the ratio is not all the way up. I think these settings on the snare drum make the sound more natural, and also ghost notes don't get lost completely. But you get a nice cleaned up version of the snare anyways. As you can hear, there's still some cymbal bleed in the snare signal, and that's why I'm using the FabFilter Pro MB trick with the expander on the high end. So every time the snare hits, the expander opens and lets all the high information through, and then immediately after the transient of the snare, it cuts off all the highs. So even less cymbal bleed. Then again we have snare samples. The first one is again from the CLA expansion, CLA Rock Snare 8. An awesome sample with a lot of attack and crack to the snare drum, and another instance of Slate Trigger 2 on another track with again E-drum samples and some GGD samples. As with the kick, I'm relying heavily on samples to achieve this bombastic snare sound. Let's take a look at the bass processing. First of all, we have an SPL transient designer to get more attack. Next, an EQ to clean up some of the boxiness and also some nasty frequency at 4K. Then the SSL console from Brainworks, adding lots of highs, cutting 3K very narrowly, just 1 dB, removing some boxiness at 700 Hz and adding some more of the fundamental 200 Hz. Here I turned the THD knob a little bit up because on snare I like some saturation, and also the compressor is working but the mix is at 60%. This adds a lot of punch to the snare signal. The last plugin on the snare bass is Radiator from Soundtoys, another saturation plugin. I crank the input all the way up, but the mix is very low. This adds some explosiveness and also some length to the snare sound. Just for fun, let's listen to it with mix all the way up. Okay, so this is the snare sound. Let's move on to the toms. Now for toms, I strip silenced the recording and I also duplicated the tom tracks down to the overhead folder because I used the tom microphones for close mics for my splashes and also for the hi-hat on the right side. First, let's listen to the toms themselves. Bypass the plugins. As you can hear, they sound very boxy. Maybe I should have tuned them a little bit better. But yeah, this recording was 3 years ago. It is what it is. So I had to use lots of EQ on every single track. Cutting lots of mids and low mids to get rid of this boxiness. Much better with this EQ. Let's take a look at the tom bass processing. First up, we have the SPL Transient Designer, which we have seen a few times today, adding lots of attack to the signal. Then the SSL console, adding highs and lows and cutting some mids. Also here, the THD button, so the saturation is all the way up. And also the compressor is working 100% mix and the output gain is down 2 dB. Much more high-end and therefore a much cleaner tom sound. Then I have another instance of FabFilter Pro Q3. And finally, the last plugin on the tom bass is the Vertigo VSM3. This is a saturation plugin. I really like saturation on plugins, especially when I did this much of EQ. I think it adds some life back into the toms and also it makes them sit better in the mix. Let's move on to the overheads. There we have the 2 overheads. Let's listen to them with no processing. Then we have a hi-hat microphone, which is quite low in the mix because I think the hi-hat was loud enough in the overheads. With just a little dip at 11K. And then here we have the 3 tom tracks, all of them with a fairly high low cut, just to get some more of the splashes. And tom 3 is used for the hi-hat. Without the low cut, you can hear how much bleed from the tom itself is in the microphone. But with the low cut, it sounds alright. Now let's take a look at the bass processing on the overheads. First up, we have an EQ with a really high low cut at 600 Hz, then some dip at 1.2K, 2 narrow cuts at 3.7K and 11K. As you can hear, with this recording I wanted that the overheads really just add the cymbals to the mix and not so much shell information. That's also why I added another instance of FabFilter Pro MB, which is compressing just the high end. This is to get less attack of the snare. Then another EQ with some more cuts to clean up the signal. And finally an 1176 compressor to compress the overheads. Now let's move on to the room As I said, this is a fairly small room, and I placed the microphone, by the way it was a Neumann SM69 stereo microphone in XY configuration. I placed it directly in the room, just in front of the drum kit, and here's what it sounded like. Now, as all the close mics from the shells sound very scooped, I wanted to have a more mid-heavy room sound so that it glues together the whole drum kit. That is why the first plugin. Okay, the really first plugin is a gain plugin, but this is just so both channels have the same volume. Then I have this EQ, and as I said, I cut the lows and the highs to have a more mid-heavy sound. Then I added a compressor with fast attack 4 milliseconds, fast release 60 milliseconds, so that I get more length out of the drums. Next I added a reverb, 1 second of reverb time, 20% mix, and the color is at bright. Most of the processing I'm doing to the rooms is to add size and length. Also, the next plugin, Decapitator from Soundtoys, is to distort the signal, again to add length. And lastly, another reverb plugin, this time Seventh Heaven from Liquid Sonics. Also on this reverb plugin the mix is not at 100%, it is at about 25%. So these are all the drum tracks that I have recorded. Then I added 3 parallel tracks. The first of it is a reverb. Again, Seventh Heaven from Liquid Sonics. The large and bright setting, 100% wet, and then I also added a Q to get rid of some lows. I'm just sending the snare and the toms to this track. Then I have a parallel drum compression. I'm using once again this SSL style bus compressor. Highest possible ratio, highest attack, fastest release, mix 100%. You can see 8 dB of gain reduction and a lot of punch. And finally, the parallel distortion. There we have Decapitator with drive at 6.5 and the A-style distortion. You can hear it is completely distorted, and the main goal of this track is again to add length to the drums. And now let's listen once again to how the drums sound in the mix. So there you have it, this is how I mix the drums for my cover of Mick Gordon's The Only Thing They Fear Is You from Doom Eternal. And if you would like to have some awesome free drum samples, then just click the link in the description and you can download them. I would really appreciate if you would support this channel by subscribing. I hope you have learned something today. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye.